Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Property Hustler Show. My name is Andrew, and today Roman and I are joined by a very special guest, Marcin Drozdz, who is a specialist at capital raising, deal sourcing. He has an investment focus in multifamily real estate in both Canada and the US, and he is also the founder of the M1 Community Coaching Program. So, Marcin, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on the show, guys. Really appreciate it.
That 140 unit building, when did you start that? When did you pick that up?
Well, we finally closed on it in June, but I mean, I was circling that thing last fall, so it took a minute.
Yeah, that is a little while. Is that the biggest one you've done?
No, we did a 200 something unit before that.
How long do you, as a project like that, usually take you on average when you're dealing with this kind of size, 1 to 200 units?
I've bought buildings in a weekend and I've bought buildings in 6 months. So it just depends on the circumstances, right? Ultimately, when COVID first hit, we bought 82 townhouses and I bought it from an iPhone. Literally, I had the guy walking, because you couldn't leave the country, right? So the guy walking around with his phone showing me. Eventually when you know what you're doing, you start doing things a little bit more proactively. But, there's other deals where you think you're at the finish line and 6 months in, you realize you burned 30 grand or 20 grand or whatever it is on due diligence. And, you just have to walk away. So it's both sides.
Everybody, I feel like, has their bread and butter, and there's things that that you can look at that at some point you just understand. But when you're buying something on scale like that, is there more confidence because it's more predictable, or is it just you have a unique familiarity? Like just to contrast it, sometimes people ask me about properties because we do a lot of house flipping. People will ask about details about the project, and at some point you just know that there's X amount of problems and only so many things that can go wrong. And you look at a house and they all start to look the same. So oftentimes from pictures, you can tell a lot of things. But when you're doing large scale units, like what you're talking about, there's probably a lot more standardization and predictability to some of the stuff. Is that correct?
There could be. There could be. The problem is a lot of people bounce around, right? So it's not just the asset; it's everything that encompasses the asset. Whether it's in my case, the state that you're doing business in, the tax, the landlord laws, the macroeconomics, the employment base. There's so many things that factor into a decision-making process. But I mean, if you're just looking at the bricks and sticks, it's the same thing everywhere. I mean, although, hold on, if you buy multifamily in Canada compared to Texas, which is where we typically buy in the South and in Texas, there's things in Texas that matter that don't matter in Canada, or vice versa. Like, for example, in Canada, foundation. If you have a foundation issue, you have a real issue, like a legitimate, all right, hold on, are we even going to pursue this thing, or do we relook at what we're doing? In Texas, it's a desert. It's dry. It dries up. Foundation cracks happen. They got 101 ways to fix it. So it's an issue, but it's not the issue. Whereas, for example, I had some partners fly down with the last building we bought. They're walking through the building with me, and one guy's tapping their shoulders. He goes, "So when are you going to replace all these windows?" I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "Well, they're old." I'm like, "So?" He goes, "Well, what about the heat?" I'm like, "Dude, it's 100 degrees. What do you mean about the heat? If anything, we can get rid of the windows." So it's a different mentality. Different things matter. Now, I'm not saying you have crummy windows or cracked or holes or whatever and you're negligent, but you don't need the triple plane glazed, quadruple sealed stuff like we do in Canada. Right. So you put your money in different things, and different things are priorities for people. Ports. In Canada, you'd never think to pay extra to park your car outside in a carport, because why? Why would you need a carport? I mean, you'll just brush the snow off. Texas, 100 degrees, leave your car in the sun. Yeah, I'll pay the extra $20 to park my car in the shade. So there's a lot of little things that are different in that regard, but fundamentally, you're right. When you look at a house or when you look at an apartment building, eventually you develop a core set of assumptions that you build in, and that typically helps you run your way through due diligence a lot faster.
What are you paying per unit, if you don't mind me asking, roughly?
Or what's a good deal?
So I don't like that question as a standalone question, because I've bought deals where I've paid 20 a door or less than 20 a door, and I've bought stuff for close to six figures a door, which is
Yeah.
still cheap by Canadian standards.
That's
But
why I'm asking, because it's
you know,
crazy up here. Yeah.
the better question to ask is, I think, what are the gross rent multiples that you can get on an asset? So for those people that don't know what GRM is, GRM is assume that whatever you collect in gross rent per year, that's a number. So let's say you buy I don't know, a condo in Toronto, you pay $1 million and you get, let's be generous, let's say you get 3 grand a month rent. Right? So you get 36 grand a year. So 36 divided by a million, that's not quite 30 because it multiplies 30 times into it. So it'll take 30 years ish of gross rents to get $1 million. It totally disregards rents and expenses and inflated. It's just kind of like a back of the napkin calculation, right? So 30x is very high. For me, I like to buy stuff that's like 6, 8 times X. So as an example, the last building we bought, we paid 77 a door. Rents on the units, let's just be conservative, $1,200, 1,200 times 12. It's 14,000 and change. It's about a 5x, 4x, 5x. Without knowing anything else about the deal, just the total inflows of cash on a gross basis divided by the purchase price,
Yep.
how many years of gross inflows would it take me to equal what I'm paying for it? And I like to look at that 48 number.
It sounds like the cap rate calculation. When we're looking at things, we calculate how long is your going to take to get a return on your cash on cash value. Whereas sometimes I think when people are justifying an investment, a lot of consideration or value is weighed on the value of the property itself that will eventually get sold as like a turnkey product to somebody else. And I feel like that's often wishful thinking, right? It's not very reliable, but I feel that where you're shopping and what you're producing, it's the calculation is a lot more reliable because people always need a place to live and you'll be getting that money coming in.
Yeah, so I'm also not a speculator in the strictest sense. I'm not the guy. I don't look at real estate as a, hey, this is exciting, let's give it a shot. I have other investments in operating businesses and other things that, it could be a hero or it could be a zero. For me, real estate is more of like I call it the entrepreneur's, savings plan, right? It's where an entrepreneur can put their money and with some relative degree of comfort know that that's gonna work for them. So for me, apartment buildings are that. Anytime I've strayed from apartment buildings, it costs me money. Especially in real estate. So, you stick to what you know. I'm almost 20 years at it. So you eventually figure out pretty quick what you're good at. And then if you want excitement, go skydiving, go bungee jumping, go paintballing, drive without your seatbelt on. I don't know, do something else. Just, get your excitement somewhere else, not in real estate. That's my philosophy.
Yeah, as much as possible. I think people ought to chase boring real estate endeavors rather than the exciting things. And people have the wrong idea sometimes. We find that when people set their long-term goals, at least in Canada, people sometimes like to misclassify the work that they're doing and where they're heading, right? Because you have different stages of, let's say, a project that's being developed. You have the developer stage, and then you have the builder stage, and then there's people who will lay the groundwork and do the permits and anything involved in the soft costs. And it overall sounds to people sometimes like certain titles are just I'm going to say sexier. Right? Somebody likes to call themselves a developer, but the work they're doing is not necessarily within that class. They misconstrue things, or people want to say they want to get into development or building, but they don't know what the day-to-day work actually is. And it is fundamentally quite boring. It should be anyway, because there's a lot of time in between, right? Because I mean, your project turnover, at least in Canada, it can take a long time. Tell me, what is your project turnover over there?
Well, that's the thing. So look, I love being a Canadian, but I very much prefer doing business in the US because in the US it's down to business. Now there's parts of Canada, I'm sure there's municipalities and provinces, for example, like Alberta, and certain places where business is the order of the day. But in a lot of parts of Canada, it is, especially as a developer. I'm not a developer. I've never aspired to develop or be a builder, but I talked to some of the developers and builders in my network, and God forbid you find an endangered, fill in the blank animal on your property while you're putting up fence or pouring foundations, because the whole thing becomes a wrap, and you're doing studies, and 6 years later you're still talking about where to put the fence line, and it's a mess. So I can tell you that specifically in Texas, it's very business friendly, very, very business friendly. Permitting is kind of common sense based. A lot of the conversations we deal with at they call them counties, at a county level is, again, people are trying to get things done. And people want to get things done. They want to move on. The pace is faster. I feel like people walk down the street a little bit faster. They're a little bit more, I call it the I know a guy phenomenon, where in Canada, if somebody can't help you, they typically say, yeah, sorry, like, can't help you. That's it. In Texas, at least, and other places I've invested, it's like, look, I can't do this, but I know a guy. I know a girl. I know a guy. I know, like, everybody's just trying to move things, right? Nobody wants to be the reason why the party stops. And I think that, too much of that is too much as well, but they have that hustle culture, which I really like, and appreciate down there.
Actually, it's funny because that's something I've been talking to people more and more about these days is, well, our brand is Property Hustlers, right? Because we're actually involved in we bring people together who appreciate that hustle and are willing to do so because there's no other way to get by. But it does seem that sometimes it feels that we're surrounded by a lot of people who are absent of that hustle. Like, people are comfortable, right? And I think when people are comfortable, sometimes they can find comfort, or maybe it's just that there's not a lot of incentive, because I feel like in Canada, it's not as business friendly, right? And there's a lot of red tape after red tape and just friction that you have to go through in order to accomplish things, right? Whether you're talking about tax laws or whether you're talking about, restrictions, like we have our artificial restrictions for building. The green belt thing is a big topic of conversation that recently was shut down, and now everybody's thinking, okay, we've created an artificial island where everybody's just going to have to get tightened into the spot. And there's people that have solutions, but we have archaic bylaws. We have archaic systems in place that don't really foster in the type of innovation I think we need. And that's why I think a lot of Canadians are going to places like the US, where it's considerably more business friendly and people can expand their horizons and chase opportunity.
Well, and money goes to where it's treated best. That's ultimately what happens. People will focus their energy, they'll focus their money, they'll focus their time where they're rewarded for it. And I mean, short of you having an affinity or a personal, bias to, hey, I grew up here, I was born here, I'm going to fight the good fight and, change everything. And that's fine. You can push up against that, but that in a lot of ways, it's kind of like fighting gravity. You just have this overwhelming consensus of, I mean, look at, and again, not to speak at a turn here, but tax laws. To your point, the one, you want to create more housing in Canada. Here's an idea: introduce 1031 exchange. 1031 exchange, for people who don't know what that is the ability. In the US, they have this. I love this. It's brilliant. Although as a Canadian, I can't benefit from it, but as an American, I can see the benefits of it. 1031 is this: you could sell an investment property and buy something of equal or greater value, tax deferred. So you sell something for $1 million, you get your $1 million minus whatever mortgage you had back as cash. As long as you buy something of equal or greater value within a certain period of time, within 6 months, you have the ability to roll your entire capital base into that next deal. So what does it do? It gets rid of this entire mentality of hoarding in Canada, where Canada, nobody wants to sell anything because you don't want to pay the taxes on it. So you refi till you die, as some people say. And then the problem is you can't do that anymore either, because interest rates are 6-7%. So, what are you doing? You're sitting on a condo, you get a ton of equity in it. It's debt equity. You can't do any. I mean, you could refi it, but rates are higher now. So why would you? And then you don't want to sell it because you don't want to pay the gain. And think about what happens when you don't sell it. So you have 5, 10, 20 of these condos or apartments or, small properties, whatever it is. How many more people would sell these properties if they had the ability to take all of those proceeds and then roll it into a small apartment building or a big apartment building or another business? Like think about the knock-on effects. All the real estate commissions that would get paid, all the real estate fees, all the financing fees, all the contractors. Anytime you sell a property, you want to renovate it to make the most of your deal, right? So you have all this stimulation that you can create in the economy just by giving the entrepreneur an opportunity to, hold on to their wealth a little bit longer before getting skinned, at the finish line here. And it's like, we can understand this because it's like, now the other side of that coin is, well, Marcin, hold on a sec, but when I sell my house, I don't pay any taxes. Fair enough. And that's why, your own house, that's great, but where's the incentive for you to build, for you to develop, for you to take risk, for you to create an opportunity for someone else? Like, if all you do is own your own house, I mean, you're not doing anything for anybody else. You're just a consumer.
Well, Marcin, you see, now you're sounding like you're talking about things that will stir up business, and I don't know if we want to do that over here. We
No,
want peaceful, calm lives.
no, look, we don't want that here. Look, like I said, I'm thankful for Canada. I grew up here. I love this country. Love being Canadian. I'm proud of it. I'm the guy that'll put a little Canadian maple leaf on a backpack when I'm all over the world. I love it. I love Canada. From a business standpoint, you're going to keep losing people if you don't create an environment where you have, the property hustlers, the real estate investors, the guys that are out there that are doing stuff. If you don't create an environment for them to want to continue to take additional risk, to employ people, to create opportunities, then they're not going to do it. It's just not going to happen. You're going to have a bunch of dead dirt, a bunch of dead equity, and a bunch of properties that people own, and people are complaining that rents are going up. Well, yeah, they are going up. There's no housing. Why is there no housing? Well, there's no housing because it's this circular conversation. Everybody's pretending they don't know what the problem is.
The problem becomes pretty obvious, but that's what I'm saying. There's a disposition that feels like it's adverse. But on the lighter note, because I thought this was funny, do you remember when the Rich Dad Poor Dad seminars first came out, and everybody was going to those events in Toronto and wherever, and there was a lot of American teachers, American instructors that were coming over, and there was a period of time, and I saw this happen, where they were teaching the tax deferral concept, which is true in the States, and they were teaching it in Canada as something that you can do, but you couldn't. Right. And then a bunch of people ended up selling their properties and reinvesting it, and then they didn't declare it. Now, what's funny about that is that there were a lot of people that essentially the CRA caught up with them and was like, hey, by the way, you have taxes. But there was a bunch of people that no one ever came knocking on their door. And then eventually there were corrections coming out where I guess accountants and auditors started to tell people that, hey, no, you can't do this. This isn't a thing. This is an American concept, because they're consuming American-based education, right? So what you're talking about is I had heard about it, but I heard about it as something that was being taught incorrectly to Canadians. So I thought it was just funny that you're bringing that up.
With any information, whether it's from me or from you guys, my philosophy to anybody is, look, take what you like, leave what you don't. And if you're going to action anything, check with a lawyer or an accountant before you do it, because ultimately your circumstances are different than mine, than someone else's, than someone else's there, right? But yeah, look, the 1031 is the tip of the iceberg, right? Something else they have in the US that we don't benefit from as Canadians is something called bonus depreciation. They literally have an entire category of I guess experts in the US. They're called cost segregation experts, and literally their job is to go in when you buy an apartment building or commercial plaza or whatever it is. They'll look at your asset and they'll say, hey, you know what? Yeah, technically that is supposed to be depreciated over 5 years, but you've got 3 years of life left on this thing. Technically that's a 20-year thing, but realistically you've got 10 years. And what it allows you to do, pardon me, that's accelerated depreciation. So there's two additional things I can mention to you guys. So that's called accelerated depreciation, where you have literally a cost segregation expert. And because you can take that depreciation in a shorter period of time, they give you a report, you deal with the IRS, everything's legal. You have a lot more ways to deduct, income and create, deductions for yourself as an entrepreneur. And if that isn't even enough, you also have what I mentioned earlier, bonus depreciation, where literally you can buy something, whether it's, a jet, or whatever for your business, or a building, or whatever you're buying. Last year was 100%, this year it's 80%. Like, this is just, in Canada, we're just sitting there like, jaw dropped, like, really? Yeah, that's why, like, why do you think so many people have Bentleys and Ferraris, and maybe that's the wrong example, but why do you think they have these things? A lot of them it's part of the business. And it's just a different culture. I'm not saying that one extreme is better than the other, If you want to create more opportunities here in Canada, you got to give the entrepreneur a fighting chance. And no one's even asking for a handout. They're just asking for certain groups to get out of the way. That's all it is.
And
Yeah.
so there's so many strategic advantages you get even just through taxes and investing in the states. Is there anything specific about Texas you like versus other states that provide you an advantage in your investing?
So here's a fun fact about Texas. The Canadian GDP is about $1.7 trillion per year. Texas as a state is 2 trillion. So the economy
Big
in
win.
Texas alone, most people don't know that,
Yeah,
especially Canadians.
that's a lot.
So Texas is, if Texas was a country, it would be the seventh or ninth largest economy in the world.
Yeah,
I
we're
forget.
like a G7 country, and they're
Oh yeah,
topping our economy.
Texas is massive. You know what's crazy about that is that, and look, Texas isn't the only place. I'm not just waving the Texas flag. I've invested in Tennessee, Arizona, other states. It's just, I guess we're talking about where I'm at now. That's where I'm at today.
Yeah.
And Texas is fantastic. Also, the last time we had a major recession, if you look at first of all Canada, and that's one of the benefits of Canada is we haven't really had the same kind of ass kicking as the US had every time there was a recession last, whether it was the last one with the great financial reset or the SNL before any of these things, we don't really have the same ebbs and flows, which has historically been good. So you got to give Canada its due for that. But, going back to the US for Texas, last time there was a reset in the market, 07, 08, it's actually when I got started in private equity, right around then. Arizona, Florida, and Nevada were the three worst hit. I have friends in Texas, and some of them have told me, honestly, I wouldn't have even known we were in a quote unquote recession back in 07, 08 if they didn't turn on the news, because it was business as usual for most people.
So you're saying like, yeah, back when you started, if someone wanted to start now, what are the differences between starting now versus when you started? Like, if someone wanted to get started now,
In what context?
in terms of starting up, getting into it, like I'm sure back when, like for example, even 5 years ago, it was a lot easier to get a mortgage. Do you know what I mean, or to get financing?
Oh,
Now
yeah,
there's going to be a
look,
lot.
yeah, Roman, I wouldn't really worry about that kind of stuff. Those are all just look. The game is always the same. Just the circumstances and the players change. That's all it is. You just, quote my late great friend Stefan Arnio. He wrote a book called Money People Deal. And that's really all there is to a transaction. Whether you're buying apartment buildings, storage facilities, operating companies, you have the money, the people, and the deal. And really so to answer your question directly, the first thing I would have done sooner than I did do is I would have identified what is the skill that I want to be unequivocally the best at. And eventually I figured out that was deal structuring, capital raising, that people side of the equation, right? The people and the money. But getting clear on where you can be unequivocally great is the best place for somebody to start, because the what you do, I don't want to say it doesn't matter. It obviously does to an extent, but it's the skill that you have that can transfer from opportunity to opportunity to opportunity that really makes you invaluable to the equation. So for me, it would have been earlier in my life to really figure out that where I was meant to be was, in front of people, cutting deals, figuring out how to raise capital, how to structure opportunities. In hindsight, I would have, rather than going to school for the stuff initially I went to school, I thought I wanted to be a lawyer and whatnot. And knowing what I know today, I would have gone to school for accounting.
Yeah.
That would have been the thing that I would have changed, but I didn't have context for that. It sounds like a boring thing to say, but in the context of what I'm doing today, that would have probably saved me a couple $1 million now that I think about it.
Funny that you say that, because you know how when a lot of people give advice on how it is you should go about starting your own business, they always say something like the first person you should hire, who is it? You should hire an accountant. And a lot of people kind of dismiss that sometimes, because when they don't have money to speak of, it's kind of like account for what, right? They struggle with this. But everybody ultimately goes through that school of hard knocks where they figure out that if they had a better understanding, a better grasp of the numbers, and they didn't pain themselves so much by doing things incorrectly, even when it comes to categorizing or just understanding how to read a P&L, for example, people would be better off if they're going through business, having those skill sets. So I think what you're saying there is pretty common. But this is also, I think, a good point for us to go into some of the things that your people will find out about you, Marcin, today if they look you up. For example, if you look yourself up on Google, the first things that come up is capital raising and growing, right? And so capital raising is obviously a big deal for you. And I think there's a lot to be had there because everybody has a lot of the similar issues. It doesn't matter what level it is, whether you want to do small projects, big projects, where do you get the money? And a lot of people seem to get stuck there. So I want to get a little bit of your take on that. If you had to, you actually summed it up where you said people deal, and I think you said a third thing. But if you had to sum up the core fundamentals into maybe 3 to 5 points, what do you think how would you summarize that for capital raising?
Sure. So the book I was referencing, a friend of mine, Stefan Arno, who passed away, wrote years ago called Money People Deal. Fantastic book. It's a great contrast to the rich dad philosophy in the context of being able to action it in a very clear way. So I think he's got some stuff in there about, joint ventures and things like that. But ultimately, I think today more than ever, people need to really consciously see themselves as a product. And what I mean by that is people don't invest in your deals, they invest in you. Literally, I can't tell you how many times investors are like, write the check to, Marcin Drozdz. I'm like, no. There's, ABC fund, what LP something, right? But in their mind, they're investing in you. Like they know there's a deal, but it's because you're there that they have the confidence in the opportunity. Now, obviously, you've got to do a good deal and due diligence and make sure you're going down the right path. But this isn't like shopping for a mortgage or trying to pin one car dealership against another to get a specific outcome, right? They're investing in you. So if you keep that front of mind, then you'll look at yourself differently in the context of your goals. So I forget which one of my mentors said this, but he always said, dig your well before you're thirsty. Fundraising isn't one of these things that, have a great deal on Monday. Okay, pitch. I'm going to go pitch it to everybody. I'm going to blow up everyone's social media on Tuesday until I get the money. I mean, you can do that and maybe you'll get the cash. First of all, capital raising is a regulated activity. That's another rant I don't even want to get into today, but it's a regulated activity. You need the right paperwork. You need a securities lawyer, just like you need an accountant when you're trying to plan your future financially. You need somebody that is going to get you the right paperwork to make sure you're on the right side of the law when you're raising money. Canada, US, international, whatever you're doing, obviously first get the advice. So if you keep in mind that people invest in you first, then you're going to relook at how you position yourself publicly. Literally, the simplest thing most people can do, even if you're sitting there like, well, Marcin, I don't want to raise any money. Whole day you don't want to raise any money. Talk to me in 3 years, 5 years, when you finally figure out how things work in your business and you now have had some success and people have paid attention. If you had brought people along for that journey, as you're growing, as you're learning, as you're signing your first lease with your tenant, as you're, potentially having to let go of your first property manager and why, and, I don't want to throw shade on anybody, but contextually, what did you learn from the experience? As you walk them through the first time that you're looking at a fix and flip, as you walk them through the first multifamily you walk, as you share that journey with them for that 6 months or 6 years that people are paying attention to you, they're growing with you. They're seeing that you're growing, that you're competent, that you're somebody that they can work with potentially. And then literally out of the blue, and the best time to raise money is when you don't need it. Like literally the absolute best time is to raise money is when you don't need anything from anybody. I mean, arguably you're raising money all the time, even if you don't need it, because you're raising awareness. That's really what this is all about. You're building awareness, you're adding value. And when that day comes where you have an opportunity, you realize, hey, I need $1 million and I only have 700 grand. Well, wouldn't it be cool to have people to talk to and say, hey, I'm doing this, I'm short this, here's why I like the deal. What do you think? That's a different conversation than, holy crap, okay, what are we going to do? Maybe we can sell the car. And then you just start going into this frantic scarcity mode. Why not have an opportunity where you have a network of people that have seen what you've done and grow with you? So literally the most practical advice I can give anybody is really start focusing on building some form of a brand for yourself. And if you're uncomfortable with it, good. In fact, that means it's working. That's fine. That's what's to be expected. The first time you walked a deal, were you comfortable? No. The first time you wrote an offer, were you comfortable? No. You did it, and because of that your net worth increased 100 grand, 500 grand, $1 million. Or so imagine what would happen the next time you become uncomfortable with another piece of the pie.
They say that all the time. What was it? People say things like, do a couple things, or at least one thing every day that scares you, right? If you stay in the comfort zone and you're always piddling in the shallow ends, and you're never going to go deep, and you're never going to find anything meaningful. So the things that you want are probably found in the most uncomfortable areas, so to speak. Not the most, but some kind of discomfort. That works today, and I think that's interesting because asking people for money and asking them to bet on you is a very challenging skill to cultivate, right? Especially if it goes against your nature. I often find that it goes against certain things that people were taught, like don't go into debt, don't spend money you don't have. And maybe people try to teach more generosity rather than asking anybody else for questions, especially in certain cultures where talking about money is even taught as being a little taboo. Right. Mm-hmm. So it is definitely, there are a lot of obstacles that are on a human level difficult to overcome. But that's why I know at least we talk to people about trying to talk to those who are closest to you already and who recognize your brand, if you will, or who recognize you as a person. Because if you can't already ask people who know you to have faith in you, how are you going to ask strangers to have faith in you and invest in you? What was the first population that you maybe approached to raise capital?
I did the exact opposite. What
Okay,
you just said.
tell me. No, I want to know because everybody has their own journey and their own path, so it's good.
If you're not willing to invest in yourself and bet on yourself, you're not going to be able to. You're not going to have the confidence to have anybody else do it as well. So what do I mean by that? First of all, go down two paths here. Okay, so you're newer to the business, and you're just building out your understanding of real estate, and you're trying to figure out how to how to play the game, so to speak, because there's different levels. You could bird dog, you could wholesale, you could own it, you could fix it, you could single family STRs, all the different, there's so many different ways to play the game, right? So if you're just at the beginning phase and you're literally just trying to learn how to play the game, I don't think you should be raising any money. The only thing you should be doing is building relationship capital, not actual financial capital, but relationship capital, because ultimately the people that you need in your world, a check from them will not help you, because all it's going to do is enable you to make mistakes with other people's money. What you should do when you first start, in my opinion, what I did was, I think I did my first deal when I was 22, and despite my best efforts to screw the deal up, I still made money. Okay, so but I was kind of lucky because the market was, it was helping me. It's not like I added value. It's just right place, right time, and it worked out. And it was just my money, so it was fine. But the next thing I did right after that is I went to work at a private equity firm. I literally drove across the country, moved my entire life. I was willing to work for free, and I wanted to learn the game. So I was very fortunate to go from just doing the little single family things to all of a sudden, hey kid, we're buying 100, 200, 300 unit buildings. And I did it because I was willing to do the crummiest work, like the absolute crummiest work at that firm. I just wanted to get in the door and start building relationship capital and experience. So what gave me the confidence to learn the business was because I was standing on the shoulders of giants, guys that were buying 100, 200, 300 unit buildings like clockwork every quarter. We thousands of doors. It was fantastic to watch at an early age. So from that regard, that was my exposure to the business. And then with that confidence, I then went out and developed my ability to work with potential investors. But that was rough because it wasn't me, it was me repping on behalf of this entity. And that was an experience. So that was like sales 101, learning how to like build urgency, create demand, be authentic, all the different things. I could walk you guys through that story. So, but the only reason I had the confidence to go raise that dough was because I aligned myself with an entity that had a tremendous group of people working there. Most people, if you're starting out and you're doing your first deal or first couple of deals, yeah, keep it, to your point, keep it as close as you can to the people immediately close to you. But when you start going beyond that group of people, that's where your real brand is going to get tested. That's where it's like, okay, so how did your last two or three deals go? How do you do this? How do you do this? What are your SOPs? What's this? How does this work? How do you do your filings? Who does your filings? What kind of financial statements do you provide? And all these little words. And if you're sitting there and you're like, what does this word mean? What does this word mean? Your investors will see that in you, and you're not going to get a check, especially from sophisticated people. So it definitely is a process.
That's actually very interesting because you're essentially what you said there, where you align yourself with another entity and you were working with them. Was that always the goal? Were you trying to work with them because you wanted to be able to, I don't want to say piggyback their brand, but leverage?
I wanted to collapse. I always pay for speed. That's one of my philosophies in life. When you're younger and you don't have money, you pay with time and you pay with effort and sweat equity. As you get older and a little grayer and maybe a little bit more money in your pocket, you can pay with your credit card, right? So I always pay for speed. I always pay for speed because you only have so much time to do the things that need to get done. So whether you pay for speed by hiring employees, pay for speed by getting mentorship, training, coaching, whatever form of a velocity that you can create out of the situation, I always paid for speed. So at that point in my life, the only way I could pay for that was with my time and my sheer effort and enthusiasm. So I knew that there was a lot more stuff that I didn't know, and I'd taken a few of those real estate courses that come into town. You spend a couple grand here, a couple grand here, and it was good information, but it wasn't. There was no tangibility to it. I couldn't relate to the content. So for me, it was easier just to give my time freely to guys that were already actively doing it, and not like freely, but with strings attached. Because here's another problem. I get people calling us all the time. Hey, I want to work for free for you. And basically what they want to do is they want to shadow me or shadow my acquisitions team. I'm like, dude, you're a pain in the ass. What do you mean you want to shadow me? Like, what are you going to do? Carry my coffee around? How are you going to add value?
Yeah.
Right. And it's like you selfishly, yeah, sure, it'd be great if I could just shadow, I don't know, Ray Dalio around for a day or Warren Buffett for a day, but why would he want me around? I'd be a pain in his ass. So for me, when I said I was willing to do things with no strings attached, I literally showed up ready to make prints, to carry coffee, to order banners, to I did the crummiest of crumb work, and then eventually someone threw me a bone and threw me a bone and threw me a bone. Eventually, I kept executing until finally I'd raised like 20 or 25 million in equity at that firm at the time, and it was like, okay, this kid, he's cool. But through me adding value, I got more and more access to the things that I wanted out of the relationship.
By the way, I'm not even going to jump into that because that is also something that I find to be culturally not very well understood in certain parts where there was this issue. I'm going to dive into it very slightly just because it's on the tip of my tongue. I just want to say it. But there was this thing where there was this protest, I think it was happening at one of the universities where this one program had students going out for internships. And they were demanding that these internships become paid. And I'm thinking about this. I know because we've taken on interns, and they can be often quite a liability, and and employers are often doing a bit of a favor. At least I can see how that is sometimes, teaching them something. But they wanted to be paid, and then when they were talking about that, a ton of employers dropped off the list because that exchange that you just described isn't very well understood by a lot of people. They only see the time to dollar exchange, as opposed to the things that come out from the deeper things that come, the relationships, the connections, the knowledge that you develop. But that's a whole topic in itself. But sorry.
I always say, if you want to be a millionaire, work for free. Millionaires work for free. Billionaires work for free. And when you wrap your head around that concept and you understand it, it starts to click.
So I need to know now, what is it that you learned? Because when you went and worked for them, there's obviously a bit of a process. I want to know when you need to raise capital from your own investors, what is the process or the procedure you go in order to warm them up? I know you have long-term relationships. You raise it, you said, when you don't need it, but there's probably still something that you do there.
Yeah. So if you want to bolt on to the comment I made earlier about building a brand, is once you have your brand and you have something to engage people with, whether it's some kind of a free resource or maybe you're part of some kind of a charitable event or something that keeps you front of mind in a positive light, in a way that you're truly adding value, not expecting anything of return, you end up creating a following. You end up creating a group of people that, just want to see what you're doing, how you're doing, what's going on. Like they're happy to introduce you to other people because they value that relationship capital. And by introducing you to someone else, they're adding value to someone else's world. It's like if you find a video that you really like on YouTube, you'll share with, three of your buddies because you're like, hey, you should totally watch this. And it's not because that guy is selling something in the video, it's because that guy or girl is talking about something that really resonates in the context of this is valuable information. So you want to share that. So once you wrap your head around being a person of value and providing value, it's easy to create continuity, whether you have a newsletter, a podcast like you guys have here, whether you've got however you're doing it, blogs, maybe blogs aren't a big thing anymore. I'm kind of showing my age a little bit, but whatever the forum is for you to share your thoughts on an ongoing and relatively consistent basis. That's the other thing. You can't just pop on and do something once and disappear, because people become accustomed to hearing from you in the context of maybe the Property Hustlers podcast. Maybe you've got a video series that you do on YouTube, and they're waiting for that. They become accustomed to it. So when you develop that kind of a following, it gets a lot easier. Now, that is more of a long-term play. There's something else I'll share with you in the context of, let's assume that you've had a deal of a lifetime fall in your lap and you have 2 months to figure out how to get, I don't know, $500,000 or $5 million or whatever it is that you're after. There's a framework that I have. And by the way, just full disclosure, talk to a lawyer, talk to an accountant, get your documents together first. Don't just, Marcin said on a podcast. Yes, if you have all your ducks in a row. But there's a framework that I call the EASY system. EASY is exclusive, abundant, scarce in your allocation. And it's a simple framework where you can engage or re-engage in a conversation with somebody at any point. And exclusive. So what's exclusive about your opportunity? So case in point, the last deal we bought, we paid $77,000 a door. The guy just down the street closed a few months earlier for a 20% premium to ours, and our units are about a third already renovated. So huge check mark. And literally similar vintage, check, like almost like a perfect comp. So perfect exclusive, like easy way to demonstrate value. Another thing that's exclusive, we're paying, I think, approximately half of the replacement cost to buy this thing. So in other words, if you had to build this thing today, you'd spend double what I paid for it. Okay, what does that mean? Well, how are you going to compete with me? If you build down the street, your rents are going to have to be way higher than mine for you to earn a return comparable to mine. So that's a big thing. The third thing, what's exclusive about the opportunity? We're on, I think it's Burke Road. Burke Road has tens of thousands of cars. Great community. Average income is 55, 60,000, which is a lot in Texas. It's not a lot here, but relative there, it's a good income. So think of 2 or 3 things that make your deal like an easy thing to understand, whether someone's a lawyer, a plumber, or owns a business. They can very easily understand what is it about that deal that got your attention and could potentially get theirs. So that's E, exclusive. A for abundance is, you need to be able to demonstrate that you have options in the context of investors. So you don't want to call them and be like, hey man, like you don't want to come across like you need their money, because otherwise this thing isn't happening. Because then it puts a lot of pressure on the investor. And also more sophisticated investors will really tilt the terms because they know you need the dough. So you want to make sure that you can demonstrate that you have an abundance of investors. So how do you do that? You can say, hey, Roman, I just want to give you a shout. I know we talked about this thing a few months ago. Unfortunately, that didn't work. I have this other opportunity that's very similar to what we were talking about before. I'm about to hit send to my network here for our newsletter. I just want to get on the call with you, see if you had any interest. So there you go. You've created you've demonstrated abundance, and at the same time, you've created S, which is the scarcity. So scarcity, you can create scarcity in 2 ways. And guys, you got to be authentic. You can't this isn't the bullshit story. Like, this is the real deal. What's going on? So S for scarcity, you either have a scarcity of time, so you have to close in a certain period of time, or you have a scarcity of how much capital you need. So we only need 500,000. We only need X amount of dollars. Our average investor in our last deal was 100 grand a piece. So we're probably looking for 4 or 5 more investors. That sounds more manageable and approachable than, hey, I need $500,000. So, okay, well, why are you calling me? I got 50, right? Like it's just more relatable. It's more bite size for people, right? And
Yeah.
then why your allocation. So you'll have a conversation. They'll probably pepper you with a few more questions. Dialogue will flow. You'll figure out that they're a fit. They have the money. They have the means. You qualify them. You do what you do. Keep everything obviously professional and very courteous. And then at some point you might say, look, so obviously you're going to want more information. I'll send you the full data room on this. That's another thing, guys. You want to make sure you know how to build a data room. That's another thing we teach at M1 is you need to make sure you know how to package your deals or your fund so that it looks the right way. So I'll send you the data room. You can obviously review everything, make sure you're comfortable. And if everything looked the way you think it looks, is there an amount you'd consider investing? And if they're interested, they'll tell you. They'll be like, yeah, look, I'll probably do 100, 250 grand, 50 grand, whatever it is. And they'll always say, I got to look at the paperwork, yada, yada. I say, yeah, no problem, 100%. And at least you've got what I call soft commit. And if somebody starts saying things like, well, I got to check with my goldfish, we got to talk about it, or, whatever, whatever whatever the rebuttal is, then maybe they're not interested. Maybe the real objection will come out. Like, actually, I don't get the check from this sale till, but at least you can have a real conversation. And what that system does is it really kind of compacts the sales process because capital raising is sales. But again, I preface everything, guys. You need to make sure you have the right legal paperwork before you actually collect checks from people. That's a big piece. But again, EASY, and that will give you a pretty good boost, I think.
Actually, and I think that also touches on something that people always ask questions about because they think sometimes that this is what sells itself, is how to structure these deals. Because, and I want to ask this question on a very high level because sometimes people don't know what it is that they're selling. Yes, people are investing in you as a person, and they have to believe in you, and that all matters. But you don't want them to open the paperwork and think, oh, well, I don't want to get involved in this. And people want to know how to answer questions. Like if you approach a real estate investor, people are going to ask you, might sometimes blatantly ask you, well, where's your cut in all of this? How do you make money? And what portion are you taking? And some people might feel a little ways about maybe what money you're making, and some people get creative and start to kind of try to mask it. People do funny things. So what do you find is a palatable way for you to structure such things?
I mean, disclose everything.
Yeah.
Disclosure is the name of the game. There's ways to be able to address it, discuss it. There's nothing wrong with everybody making money in a deal. One of the things we teach at M1 when we do underwriting and deal structuring or fund structuring, depending on which format people are going down, is we actually teach you to build your margins into the transaction. I call it looking through the deal. So like Neo in the Matrix where you see ones and zeros, I like to look at an apartment building or whatever it is that I'm trying to buy, and I burden that transaction with everybody's requirements, and then I come up with the price that I'm willing to pay. So that's how I do my business, right? I don't really care what your sticker is. I look past it and look through it. I look at what the outcome I need for my investors, for myself, for everyone's, is the juice worth the squeeze? And then based off that, I price in, whatever other variances I need to incorporate. And then ultimately that's what I'm prepared to pay. And that's where I start. The problem most people have, as you guys probably have seen this, is they'll do a deal that they'll think it's a good deal, they'll tie it up, and then the deal isn't as good as it was before, and then you start justifying things. You start telling yourself stories, and you're like, oh, you know what? If we just move the rent by $80 or $100, or if we bring the expenses down a little bit, and then you start telling yourself, story. And then the other problem is your fees are harder and harder and harder to justify because the deal isn't as good of a deal. And then you sit down in front of somebody that's been around the block a few times, just they'll blow you out of the water. And then it becomes a full out scrap for you to justify your existence, and when you should have walked away from the deal in the first place. So, but let's assume you're doing a great deal and an investor has an issue with you making money. My philosophy is you need to make some money up front as the guy who put the deal together, and you need to disclose those fees. With the bulk of your compensation, in my opinion, should be tied to the success of the project. So 100%, I'm aligned there. You could, like this last deal, we'll make millions and we'll make millions together when we're done. Not like I made a whole bunch of dough up front and I run off with it and say, good luck. Like, I don't agree with that at all. Like you need to see the thing through. And the bulk of your comp should be tied on the back end. But if an investor has an issue with you making some money up front, go find a new investor.
You said that the bulk of your comp comes at the end, right? And
Right.
so you structure it, investors get the bigger payouts in the beginning. You as an active partner take your payout incrementally to cover costs throughout, and then towards the end is where yours comes out, right? Is there a standard percentage distribution that you follow or a range?
You're asking a pretty loaded question. But I mean, if you're raising equity or if you're raising debt, you're going to do things differently, obviously. But if we're talking about equity, typically you would do a 70-30 split in favor of your investors and you'd pay them some kind of a preferred return above that. So preferred return could be 5, 6, 7, 8%, whatever it is. And you typically then split into a 70-30. And then the next conversation is, well, Marcin, why would I do apartment buildings and give away 70% if I can do a JV on a house and only give away 50%? Well, fair enough. But do you want to have half a grape or do you want to have a third of a watermelon? Like, what are we talking about here, right? Like you gotta get rid of that limiting thinking process because I'd rather take a third of a $10 million deal or a $25 million deal than half of a, I don't know, a fix and flip. And I'm not saying you can't, but it's just you understand the mentality, it changes as you start to scale. Both are great, but there's a reason why the economics have to skew a certain way.
People start to exercise their decisions differently as they start to realize plateau points in different industries. For example, fix and flips, there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of moving parts. Whereas, you can do what you're doing and you can focus on pretty much one thing. It's a bigger thing, but your focus is more there.
If you play the game long enough, eventually you're going to want to subscribe to the axiom of, Abraham Lincoln got asked if he had to cut a tree down, he had 4 hours to do it. How would he do it? He'd said he'd spend the first 3 hours sharpening his axe, and then the last hour actually doing the work. So multifamily, larger deals is like that. You spend a lot more time sharpening the axe. And when you cut that sucker down, it's a lot more profitable because you spend a lot less time doing it. So like this last deal, literally, there's probably $5+ million in equity in this deal. It's one deal. How many individual deals would it take, it's just, and maybe I'm just getting lazy. I'm getting older. I got a kid. I'm trying to have more kids. So I'm trying to be like that lion that runs out once in a while for a gazelle and just takes it down and, we're good. As opposed to constantly having to.
The way you're explaining it, it really starts to shape how it is that your mind works and how you perceive things, because there is a final form that people reach when it comes to how hard are you willing to work, how much time do you want to spend, what do you want to be putting your time into on the daily, and how much of your time are you spending focusing on long-term money versus short-term money, and so on and so forth. And these are all things that people have to figure out for themselves. And I think that actually brings us into a lot of things that I also want to continue talking about. But before that, question that I know the people in our audience will ask. People struggle sometimes with the chicken or the egg concept when it comes to the whole process of raising money, finding a deal, because we want to also talk about deal sourcing. But what do you think comes first? The people, the money, or the deal? What comes first?
I like your chicken and an egg analogy because I was going to tell you just figure out where the hen house is, man.
Yeah. No, sometimes it's not obvious, right? Because what you pointed out before, where you start to justify your own deal, I find that the reason why people end up doing that often is because they didn't know who they were selling to begin with. They don't know how to identify that target demographic. So sometimes, depending on what you're doing, it might make sense to find out who you're going to pitch it to, so you know what a good deal is.
I think everybody should do a few deals before they start raising money. You have to know what a good deal looks like and what a good deal is. Ultimately, that's my bias. The only exception to that is if, again, you're partnered with or working for somebody who has got the track record and you've got the right licensing and you're set up in the appropriate way where you can just go out there and be the capital raiser, and that there's licensing and things that goes beyond the conversation. But there's a way to do this where you could just be the capital raiser legally. But ultimately, if you're starting and you got a blank canvas in front of you, I think it's really important for your longevity to know what a good deal looks like. And that I can tell you right now, I wouldn't have appreciated where life is today Had I not gone through underwriting hundreds, if not thousands of opportunities over my life, and having lost deposits and having messed up things and paid for reports and inspections that it's all a lesson, right? And ultimately the more of those things you have, we I don't know at the beginning, but somewhere near the beginning of the podcast we're talking about having the confidence in yourself. That confidence develops from you doing the work, nothing else. Absolutely nothing else will develop that level of confidence other than just shutting your mouth, putting your nose to the grindstone, and just getting shit done. Like that's it. Like it's the same thing with working out. It's the same thing with becoming a mechanical engineer or a school teacher or a fill in the blank, a police officer. Where do you develop that competence? It's from the constant reiterative process of learning your craft. So, learning how to underwrite, I think it's important. There's some people that are, no, 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 I just capital raise. Okay, but how do you know you're raising for a good deal? How do you know you're part of a good deal? How do you know you're on a good crew? Like, ultimately, what if this thing blows up in your face? I mean, look, you stay in this business long enough, things will not work. I've had things not in real estate, but I've had things not work outside of real estate. And every time it doesn't work, you learn a lesson. It costs you money, costs you time, costs you energy. What's the difference between wisdom and knowledge? Knowledge is learning from your experiences. Wisdom is learning from somebody else's, right? So why not learn from somebody else's experiences and save yourself the heartache?
Some people like the School of Hard Knocks.
Oh man, dude, I could write a book. Right.
That's your next thing. By the way, I do want to get into your M1 program actually, because that is going to be something we'll talk about. But as a prelude to that, deal sourcing is key for a lot of people. And a lot of people often, if they want to get into things, the first thing they start doing on any level is they start trying to find a deal. And sometimes I feel they do that absent of an understanding of what a deal is. And the wisdom isn't quite set in. They want to do the School of Hard Knocks. If you're doing a deal source, I want to know a little bit about the team members that you at your level would have, or where do you go about finding these deals? Like, for example, you just closed on that one you said that recently, I think you said, right? The 144. Yeah. So that one, how did you go about sourcing that? And is there a team around you that you rely on?
Yeah, I definitely rely on a lot of different people, directly and indirectly. We've got a pretty solid team. I think we've got about 24 people that work with us directly. Having one either on the acquisition side or on the training side. So we've got a good we've got a good size team. As far as the deal itself, sourcing deals. So if you're doing it, and again, starting out, it's really important that you get a clear idea of what business you're in or what business you want to be in. I don't want to hear, oh, we buy Airbnbs and we do warehouse conversions and we got this farmland that we're looking at. Like, dude, I basically heard I'm not focused on this, I'm not focused on this, and I'm not focused. Like, yeah, I'm not focused.
Sounds like Walmart.
That's what I mean. This isn't Costco, dude. That's not how this business works. You're going to get your ass kicked. You can't be good at all three of those things. I mean, if you're lucky, you can become great at one of them. I do multifamily. I love multifamily. I think storage is interesting. I like commercial. It's interesting. But if I do those things, it would be like a one-off thing and that you'd never hear about it. But for me, I know my game. It's multifamily, 100 to 200 units. I love Texas. I love the southern U.S. I've got an affinity to it. It suits my lifestyle. It fits. I know the players. I know how to plug into the game. So that works for me. So the first thing for somebody is before you start looking at deals, clear on what you want to do. So what is the why? What is the goal? What is your personal outcome that you're looking for? Can that asset class, can that market deliver that to you? There's another thing. There's a mismatch. Like people are like, oh, I'm trying to create cash flow. Okay, so why are you investing in Toronto? are you what are you buying? Where in Toronto are you going to create cash flow? Or I'm looking for growth and you're investing up in Nunavut or whatever it is. Like, really? You're going to like align your goals with the realities of the market. And that comes with studying and understanding the different types of markets. And that's a whole other thing. But once you're clear on your path and what you want to do, then you want to create a very basic, wholesalers call it a buy box. They want to see a buy box. So they want to see, what kind of stuff do you buy and why? So we have a BOTNA template. BOTNA is back of the napkin assessment. We just call it BOTNA because it's easier to say. And the BOTNA, one of the calculations says the GRM, the thing that I shared with you guys, the gross rent multiple. It has a few other questions about the market, the city, things that are essential to us and how we look at our investment thesis, how we look at the world. There's a few heck yes or heck no's in there. And if there's too many of the heck no's, then we're out. It's just, it doesn't matter. I don't care. Once it passes the sniff test, let's call it that, then you begin to underwrite. And eventually, once you know your asset, you should be able to underwrite in your mind initially. And before you even start to punch in numbers or things like that, you should be able to do it in your head eventually, and then you'll know. Initially you won't, so you're going to spend a lot of time entering numbers and data and figuring out how things connect and why, and I changed this and now this doesn't work. What the heck? Blah blah blah. And there's a lot of this wheel spinning initially, and that's good. You need that because how are you going to bring on someone for acquisitions if you don't even know what you're after? Right. So initially, yeah, it's lonely. It sucks. You gotta figure some of these things out. Having a partner is good. So if you're more sales driven and they're more analytical, really pay attention to how they're doing what they're doing, and vice versa. There's a mutual relationship there, and that's a good start. And then from there, so to answer your question directly with us, I have the botna. My VP of acquisitions runs the botna on dozens of deals. We get pitched all kinds of stuff. Very few things pass the botna. If they pass the botna, he may underwrite them after that to some basic level. We may have a discussion about it, or he may already know that it's a yay or a nay based on something, or he may come to me at our part of our relationship. He'll come to me and I'll say, hey, they want X. Realistically, I know you're going to tell them that you'd pay Y because he knows me by now. And, here's the underwriting. What do you think? And oftentimes we're at a point where I'll just sign the LOI, check whatever, 100,000, $200 deposit. Let's go. Here you go. Or it's a hard pass because, they're here and we're here. So that's how we do it. As far as how we get deals, because we're a fund, and one of the things I teach at M1 is how to build a fund rather than syndicating stuff. Because when you're syndicating, what you're basically telling a seller is that, hey, listen, I'm going to give you a lower price than you want. And check this out. I also need to go find the money. Just sign here. That's what you're basically telling somebody, right? When you're syndicated, because you don't have the money, you also want a deal. So real estate is, if you want price, you got to give terms. If you want terms, you got to give price. Like you can't have both.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way. To answer your question, so the reason why we get the deals is because we're a fund and we're constantly raising dough, and we have dough. So when I write an offer, it's like, here's the offer and here's proof of funds. And that's
Yeah.
a different conversation.
So a majority of these are off market.
All of my stuff is off market.
All of it's off market. Okay, good to know.
Like there's a deal right now that they chose to list, and I think they're trying to tease out an offer. And, I'll pay attention to it. And it's technically on market, and I might buy it because it fits the other thing that we've already done. But if they're trying to lure me into a bidding war, I'm just going to say, thanks, guys. Like, all the best.
Just walk away.
Tell me if you agree with this, but I know people who run in those circles and are selling certain commercial properties, it is often said that by the time it hits the MLS, or by the time it hits open market, it means that it already went through a round of potential buyers, the people who are actively in the game, and they rejected it, and now it's going into the open market. This is often product that is measurable and can be calculated, so it is what it is. If it performs at a certain way, it's going to be purchased at a certain price. It is not so much an emotional purchase for the most part. Therefore, it can be handled that way. It's not like residential real estate where you can throw it into the open market and it will often do better because it may pull on people's emotional strings.
So I'd say that I understand what you're saying, but I'd say that a little differently. So on the commercial side, the variability is ultimately the underlying assumptions of where the future is going to be. Is the future going to be more positive or more negative or status quo? And like for better or for worse, interest rates really drive the bus there because interest rates have although not direct, but a very large indirect impact on cap rates. So what ends up happening is if the future is bearish compared to the present, then you end up having this forward-looking discounted cash flow analysis to figure out what you're willing to pay based on the future being more grim than the present. And if that's the case, then that's going to impact your pricing. So ultimately, a fund manager, somebody like myself, if somebody's bullish on the present while everybody else is bearish, then that's what makes the market. And hopefully I'm right because I'll make a bunch of dough. And now if I'm catching a falling knife, then I'm catching a falling knife, right? So today more than ever on the commercial side, especially we're not even going to talk about office because I think that's going to be an incredible front page news story in the next 6 to 24 months. We haven't even begun to see it yet. That's another podcast. But on the multifamily side, where the cash flows are stable because people will always need a place to live. So the cash flows are great, but the question is, are the cash flows worth more or less in the future based on where people think interest rates are going to be in the future, based on as a byproduct of where inflation and cap rates. So there might have been a time where I would have agreed with exactly what you said, but today more than ever, it's kind of it's not emotion, although maybe it's underpinned in emotions. A lot of people have crystal balls that say a lot of different things for the future right now, and I think that's ultimately what's really driving the bus for valuations. And for me, quite simply, I look at it pragmatically and I say to myself, look, if I had to build this thing, what would I pay for it? Okay, I'd pay double than what I paid for this last one. Okay, so that's good for me. What else? Are people going to keep living here? Yeah, they are. There's tons of jobs here. There's tons of jobs here. There's tons of jobs here. Like there's an airport near my property that's bigger than Pearson, and that's the backup airport in Houston.
Those are all good signs.
So that's one. I got the Bay of Houston. Half of the petrochemical industry flows through that canal. And then there's NASA, this little company called NASA, not too far away. You've probably heard of them. They put things in space. So there's all these employers. So I ask myself, okay, I'm buying this thing for half of what I'm paying, half of what it would cost me to build. You got all these key employers that are always going to have low wage, middle wage, potentially higher wage employees. All right, a lot of them are going to rent. All right, it's a good area. It's clean, it's safe. You got hospitals nearby, grocery stores, banks, all that stuff. Is this area going to be here regardless of what happens with stuff? Yes. Okay, I feel good about that. But on a bigger level, you have to make bigger decisions, and that's where things start to get a lot more complicated.
And when you say it like that, it's obviously a lot more calculated and not so much based on emotion.
No,
right?
I don't get emotional about it, but I know a bunch of guys in this space that emotion is probably not the right word. Ego is probably a better word for it.
By the way, I don't think that is an absent market, though, because we do sometimes come across an investor class where oftentimes it seems like they are more concerned with what their name is associated to. Like they will purchase some buildings that don't necessarily cash flow too much. Like you talked about cash flow in Toronto. There's some Chinese, this is just a segue conversation, but there are some Chinese investors that we know that will strictly invest in properties and it has to have an address in Toronto. And they don't even care if it cash flows so much as they care that the building is pretty, the tenant class is good, they love student rentals, and they want to rent to a student class that they can tell their friends this is who we rent to. And they appreciate that, right? But that might not be you as like somebody who's trying to raise capital. Maybe that's not your target audience. But it's good to be aware, right? Because sometimes we wonder who is buying these properties. Well, it might be some of these people.
There's different investors. I mean, pension plans are huge investors in commercial real estate, and they typically pension plans, insurance companies, and when they buy apartment buildings, they buy them straight cash. They don't use debt.
Yeah.
Like they just go in straight cash. They buy cash. They even lend on other people's developments, other people's buildings. I mean, there's huge pools of capital, and they have other requirements. Also, you have to remember that not everybody is focused on the return of capital. There's a lot of people out there that they're only worried about return of capital, where literally they want to make sure that they get their money back, like above everything else. They get their money back no matter what. Now, it's not a guaranteed investment, obviously, but in their mind, it's the closest thing to it. And if they can earn an extra spread above the inflation rate for that, for their pension plan holders or whatever it is, then God bless, they're excited. So it's different mandates, different people. Literally, one of my funds I had, one of the first funds I started back in 11 or 12, we did an 8-figure equity fund, and we bought buildings that were commercial buildings, office, medical plazas, things like this in Arizona. And our mandate was we were buying buildings that were too small for the big boys, but too big for mom and pop investors. So we bought a few of those together, and then eventually we sold them off. There's different humans, there's different investors all the way up the scale. It's just appreciating and understanding it is going to help you make those better decisions.
Yeah, and I think people listening will have questions to that. Like, first of all, why would somebody be focused or more concerned of return of capital over profits? Because a lot of people are profit driven when it comes to how they want to put their money. So they'll want to understand that mentality. But also, if you want to focus on return of profits, the first thing that comes to many people's mind is, well, do I guarantee that their money is not going to they're not going to be
No, no,
taking any
no,
losses, or
no,
how
no,
do
no,
they even
guys.
present such a thing?
No,
I
no,
know
no,
what it is, but I feel for the benefit of the audience, I feel like we want to hear your
no,
perspective on
no, no,
that.
no, no. Guys, don't ever use the G word, okay?
Yeah,
There's no such thing
yeah.
as a guaranteed investment unless you're putting your money in a guaranteed investment certificate in Canada or T-bill in the US. There is no such thing as a guarantee. Now, you and I can debate till the cows come home about, well, inflation and things like that, and fair enough. But just principally speaking, there's no such thing as a guaranteed investment. So just make sure everybody's still clear on that. What I was alluding to is that different investors, somebody, for example, that sells a business for $10 million, or a family that sells a company for 50 million bucks, or a pension plan that is managing hundreds of millions of dollars of thousands of employees. Again, they're more interested in return of capital. They want to preserve the wealth that they have, and they're not so in. I mean, yeah, they'd like to make 20% returns, but they're not going to take the risk attributable typically to those types of returns, is what I'm trying to say. So
Mhm.
they're looking for much more conservative investments, things that are, like you said, the center ice property, downtown Toronto, downtown Vancouver, Chicago, New York, whatever it is. And, they want the building with the tenants that are, government backed or whatever it is, because, it looks good on paper. It's super quote unquote secure. And maybe they're going to make 5 or 6% on that. And maybe that's all they want. Most of us, though, if you're sitting on 500 grand or even 5 million bucks and you're trying to build wealth, 5% probably isn't good enough. So, you're looking to create a higher return, but then you're taking some risk. Now, what degree of risk depends on who you're working with, the type of deal, and things like this, but you're taking risk.
And that will also answer a lot of people's questions when they do eventually go pitch deals. And then they will say, well, why? We were offering 18%, 21%, but they went with the guy who was offering 8, 9, 10%. And they were taking something, and it was probably because of the risk assessment that they felt that they were wanted to take.
I can tell you guys right now, most of the people I know don't look at deals for return. They look at the people first. Then after the people, they look at how they're going to get their money back. And if the entrepreneur is clear on how to return capital to the investors, and then from there, you can assess whether the proposed return is enough to offset the potential or real risk of what you're asking you to invest in. And that's typically the more sophisticated way people do it. Most sophisticated people always want to see return of capital first. And then if there's risk, that's fine, but they want to know what the risk is so that when you tell them what the potential return is, then they can see if they think the juice is worth the squeeze. And by the way, building relationships based off promising returns is the wrong way to build relationships, because you're not selling a mortgage, you're not selling a car, you're not, this is a different type of relationship. And again, I'm going to say it one more time, get the legal advice, okay, before you take money from anybody, because it is a regulated industry. There's ways to do it, but make sure you do it right.
So you've been talking about the legal advice, the accountants. Who else is very important in your power team? Like, who are your most important people around you?
People you need to have on your team. So you obviously need an accountant, not just the guy that does your taxes from H&R Block. I mean, like a legitimate somebody who presumably has done accounting for real estate and tax filings, understands the nuances, write-offs, things like that, and that's important. You need a corporate lawyer and securities lawyer for sure. That's aside from your real estate team. But like your finance team, accountant, you need a lawyer and a corporate lawyer. A corporate lawyer, which is like commercial law, and then securities lawyer. And if you're lucky, you'll find a securities lawyer that can also do your corporate law. So you can do your minutes, your books, your corporate documents, all that stuff. But those are really important people to have on your team. And again, don't be shy to shop, because your team is going to evolve. I guarantee you, whoever did your books in your first year of ABC Investing Co. is not going to be the person that does your stuff in year 5.
You do have your M1 program, which is basically a community that is growing fast. Can you tell me a little bit about that? What is it doing? What is the goal for M1?
During COVID, I was locked at home like everyone else. And I had everybody hitting me up, hey, I got this deal, I'm working on this, I'm working on this. And, I started just giving people ideas of things that I would do or things that I've done. And one thing led to another. We ended up creating a community. So that community is called the M1 Inner Circle. Our members have personally raised over $200 million for their own deals to do over $1 billion in transactions. So we've attracted some pretty significant players and partners and people that have done a lot of cool things. And the purpose of the M1 Inner Circle, I mean, the community is a huge resource for people that are looking for mentorship, help, support, capital raising, deal structuring, due diligence, knowing how to do bigger transactions, attract bigger investors. There's a certain way to do things, and I really saw a big gap in the marketplace, whether it was Canada or US. There's a lot of great programs out there that teach you how to real estate. M1 isn't how to real estate, M1 is how to scale. So find people with money, create the right offer, launch a fund, launch your next deal. That's really what we do, and we've attracted a really strong caliber of people that have ended up signing up for M1, joining the community, and yeah, they're out there taking deals down. So it's exciting.
And where can people find you?
Best way to find me is my domain, marcindrozdz.com. Hopefully you could put that in the show notes. Otherwise, people are going to have trouble spelling that. There's two D's and there's two Z's. So, but marcindrozdz.com is there. All the resources. There's a bunch of free stuff there. You can link through to M1 Inner Circle there as well. We do webinars and all kinds of intro events. Just depends on when people watch this, but there's a lot of really good resources there for people.